Welcome to the Settlement Pros Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Meligan. All right, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the Settlement Pros Podcast with today's guest, Fareesh Sarangi, Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Fareesh.
Hey, thanks, Jack. I appreciate having me on.
I'm going to give a little bio on you.
Okay.
Fareesh Sarangi is the principal and founder of Sarangi Law, LLC, a trial law firm in Atlanta, Georgia, with specialties in personal injury suits and criminal defense. Fareesh graduated with honors from the University of North Carolina School of Law in 2006, and he's a 1996 honors graduate of Georgia State University, where he majored in finance with a minor concentration in pre-medical sciences. While in law school, Fareesh clerked at King and Spalding, where he was awarded a public interest fellowship. He also clerked at the Capitol Defender's Office in New York City, as well as the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C. Following law school, he was awarded a position at one of the most competitive and highly respected public defender offices in the country, the Bronx Defenders. Fareesh practiced at the Bronx Defenders for almost 4 years, defending everything from misdemeanor drug possession cases, DWI, sex crimes, and serious felonies, including attempted murder cases. He received national training and trial practice in specific subject matters. Upon returning to Atlanta, Georgia, he spent 2 years at one of the preeminent medical malpractice and insurance defense firms in Atlanta, where his practice focused on defending serious medical malpractice, wrongful death, and general liability claims, including tractor-trailer accidents, premises, liability claims, and slip and falls. In 2013, Fareesh decided to return to pursuing his passion, which is representing people who are victims of others' negligence. He applies his knowledge to ensure the underdogs get access to justice. Fareesh, great bio. How are you today?
I'm good, man. Thanks again for having me on. Always fun to talk to you, Jack.
Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you on. So, the way I usually start these is to go back to the beginning, the very beginning. And that's your life, the beginning of your life. So, where were you born, Fareesh?
I was actually born in Flint, Michigan. But my family is actually from Uganda. So we had just come to the States probably about 6 months before I was born. We had come in November of 72. So, that's probably why, a brown kid like me ends up in cold Michigan. But yeah, that's where life started for me, was in Flint.
Wow. And what about your family? You say a brown kid ends up in Flint, Michigan. What nationality are you? I mean,
well, my family's originally from India, but you have to go back probably to my grandparents to find actual Indian roots, because when they were born in India, in Gujarat, but by the time they were in their early teens, back in their day, they were married and they moved with their parents to Uganda, to East Africa. Wow. And then my parents were born in East Africa, and my older sister, who's a year and a half older than I am, she was born in East Africa as well, in Uganda. So most of our roots probably trace back in terms of family connections to East Africa.
East Africa. So what did your folks do in Uganda?
My father was a doctor, and he had actually just finished his med school in Dublin, Ireland, and had come back home to Uganda with the idea of finishing his residency and then practicing in Kampala, which is the city center of Uganda, the capital and everything else. And of course, Idi Amin, one of the generals in the army, staged a coup, used the military to overthrow the government in 1972, and basically said, if you're a non-black Ugandan, so there were a lot of Asians there, Indians, other minorities. He basically said, citizen or not, born here or not, you have 72 hours and you have to be gone. Otherwise, you're not considered protected by law anymore. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that was October of 72. And basically, I think there were more than 100,000 Asians and other minorities who were then scrambling, to get rebalanced and then figure out where they're going to go and how they're going to do it almost overnight.
So how did your folks handle that? They got you out of Uganda. How did that? What's the story on that?
Yeah, they were fortunate in many ways. So my father was working at the hospital at the time, and his passport was actually stamped essential government employee. They had a big EGE stamp, and if you were stamped that way, you weren't allowed to leave the country. You were forced to remain and stay in your position. But the problem was none of the rest of the Ugandans knew that we were there to help and to serve. So basically what Idi Amin had done is set a deadline and said on Monday morning, if you see somebody here who's a non-Black African, you can have their car, you can have their house, you can have their belongings, they're wearing jewelry, you can have that too. So my parents didn't really have a choice. They knew we couldn't survive here. So they basically just sort of a lot of hijinks in the middle of the night through back roads, found a way to get to the airport. My dad just hid that page of his passport, created a commotion, and they just sort of literally snuck onto a plane. But prior to that, they had done a lot of setting up to make sure we could get into the U.S. and things like that. But the actual leaving of Uganda was almost like you would see in a movie, with 3 or 4 people to an airline seat, because they just could not get enough planes to ferry people out of Kampala fast enough.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a little crazy.
Literally running for their lives. So he had things set up in the U.S. Did he have a medical situation to come to?
Yeah, well, so when he had left Ireland, he had considered coming to the U.S. at the time. He and my mom were newly married. My mom was doing her nursing. So they thought, we should consider coming to the U.S. My mom had a brother already here in Michigan, and my dad had been offered a residency position, which he turned down because a lot of our family was still in Uganda. So he said, all right, we'll stay in Uganda for a little while and just see how things go. And then literally 1 year later, when all of this happened, he called the hospital, and they knew because of the news coverage what was going on. And they said, look, we'll figure it out. We have a spot for you. So he was really, really fortunate, that the hospital in Ann Arbor offered him a residency position. So he was able to use that at the U.S. Embassy to get papers to come to the U.S.
Wow, fantastic. So how long after you were born did the family stay in Flint?
We were in Flint a couple of years, probably 2.5 years or so. And then when my father finished his residency, the plan was to move further south to get to warmer weather or to go somewhere else. But we only made it as far as Ohio. And then we were in Cincinnati for about 1.5 years. And then that wasn't much warmer. And then we ended up coming down to Atlanta and this has been home ever since. And since 1977, Atlanta's been home, or a suburb of Atlanta.
So that was really your formative years, your growing up years. Everything you remember is Atlanta or around Atlanta.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, what in grade school? What were your favorite classes, and what were your favorite avocations?
In grade school, I liked to read a lot. I didn't really enjoy the schoolwork as much. I wanted to be, I think, more social than I was. It was kind of hard to figure out where I fit. Everything was very new still at the time, But in terms of classwork, my attitude was sort of like, just kind of get it done. But I really enjoyed reading. So whatever I could read, whatever I could get my hands on, I would start reading. So I would always get in trouble. I'd have a book open inside my textbook. I'd just be reading something that she wasn't covering, and I'd get in trouble for that. But
you rebel.
I know, that's what it is, I guess, right?
Yeah. What about sports?
Sports I loved growing up. I played everything. I mean, it was at that age, it was all backyard sports. So we played, we played baseball, we played basketball, we played soccer, we played everything. But I really did fall in love with baseball, and I continued baseball up through high school until I got injured, and then I started playing again my freshman year of college. I went to Trinity, which is a small D3 school in San Antonio, Texas, and I got a chance to play baseball there for a year. So I took the shot and left Atlanta.
Wow, what fun! What fun! So, did you guys have a good team in high school?
We did. I never played varsity because I ended up messing up my ankle pretty badly when I was playing basketball in a pickup game. So then, I thought I was like, well, I was never that good at baseball anyway, so I enjoyed it. But my senior year, I never worked hard enough to rehab to get back. And but then I got a shot to play freshman year, and I thought, I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to walk on with these guys. And the coach was great. He said, look, I know you played a little bit before. If you want a shot, come out, and we'll see what you can do. And I got a chance to go play a little bit. So it was a good year.
Wow, that's an unusual story in itself. So you get injured playing basketball, don't even play your senior year in high school, but you still end up playing college baseball for a year. That is great.
Yeah, I had a good coach. He was pretty awesome. And he was just like, look, come out, put the effort in, and we'll work you in. And so it worked out well.
So did you play Little League when you were growing up in Atlanta?
I did. I played a lot of church leagues, rec leagues, youth leagues, that type of thing. Atlanta's got the part of Atlanta where I live now in Marietta, and the West Side has a thriving, very competitive Little League circuit. Like summer baseball starting at 8 years old. Every weekend is just 2 and 3 day tournaments now, and that's always been that way in this area. Where I grew up, it was a little more casual. It was more, you played baseball when it was baseball season, then everybody played basketball, then everybody played soccer. So everybody kind of moved around. It wasn't, nowadays where you find one sport, then everybody wants to make you the next star in that sport. Here we got to play everything. So
right. Yeah, we've seen that where kids now seem to gravitate into a sport at a fairly young age and then play it year round with school and club sports and then training in the off season. Specialization happens a lot sooner.
Yeah, I think it's the parents though. We have a lot of friends whose parents are or whose kids are into sports. And they'll sort of let them kind of find their way around and sort of bumble around. But you see other parents who literally, like, I guess the dad played baseball or played football or whatever it is, and it sort of becomes ingrained in the kids that this is your sport. And yeah, you're right. Specialization is so easy now that I think it makes it almost hard for kids to figure out who they are in that respect. But
yeah. So what were your friends like growing up?
Similar to me, nerdy, studious, stayed out of trouble, at least from elementary school to middle school. In high school, I felt like everybody kind of found themselves, but, I felt like I was very fortunate. I was surrounded by kids who were very ambitious. Whatever it was that they were ambitious about, I seemed to be drawn to people who were driven, even at a young age. So, whatever the hobby was, I loved the fact that a lot of my friends felt challenged to be the best at whatever it is they were doing. So that was, I thought, very cool. And I think maybe that's what draws me to a lot of people that I hang out with.
Yeah, they say that that individuals become the sum of the 5 people that they hang out with the most.
Yeah, I haven't heard that exact phrase, but I believe that. And I definitely do. I've heard the concept of sort of a stretch peer group and this idea of surrounding yourself with people who sort of challenge you and challenge the stories you tell yourself. And, even in elementary school, in a way that we couldn't articulate, I think I was drawn to people like that who had a very strong sense of who they were, because I don't know that I necessarily felt that way growing up, but I think a lot of my friends really knew kind of who they thought they were anyways. And I was always attracted to that kind of persona.
Interesting. So it sounds like maybe more than I guess what we would consider normal. Growing up, you had some questions about where you fit and what was.
So I grew up in Riverdale. I don't know if you know Georgia very well, but Riverdale is down near the airport. And even now, it's not super well developed. Typically, the suburbs north of the city have developed faster. But back then, I mean, we had the house that our house sit on was a 1 acre lot. We had a neighborhood, but all the houses were fairly spread out, and it was bucolic almost. A mile and a half down the road, you had cows and pastures and things like that. So. I felt like, first of all, Georgia was the South. And then I guess for me, I sort of felt, maybe not consciously at the time, but now as I look back, I was sort of in the southern part of the South that it felt like at the time. So there weren't any other kids who looked like me, any other kids who kind of sort of ate the same foods I ate, or whose parents were like mine, or really understood my background. we had to be home at a certain time because we had to go for religious services, or we only allowed to eat certain foods or could eat certain things. And, those types of things I think are challenging growing up when you look around and you don't have other role models for people who have shown you how to do that or how to be that way and how to be confident in that skin. So.
Yeah, and it's tough when we're growing up and you want to fit in, you want to be accepted, and then there's these differences for you.
Well, it was funny. I remember I had a friend who was African American, and he and I had walked into, it's like one of these kind of dollar store type places. His mom had taken us to go run errands. She dropped us off. And we walked into the store, and literally everyone kind of talked. Everyone kind of just stopped and looked at us. And I said, I think they're staring at you. He said, no. He said, they know what I am. They're staring at you. And so I said, yeah, maybe you're right. So that was sometimes the experience that we had going different places. But I think a lot, like you said, a lot of who you are, I think, stems from where you grew up. And I wouldn't change that. I really love Atlanta. And part of the reason I came back here and made it my home is because I really did love it. And I wanted to see it continue to evolve in the way that I could see it growing. So,
yeah. So in high school, what were your studies like? Were you a science guy? Were you?
I wasn't. No, I wasn't a science person. I think part of that was probably just rebelling. There was a lot. My sister was on track and wanted to be something in the science field. So she ended up becoming a pharmacist later. But, all of my dad and mom's friends were doctors typically. So it just seemed to be just the easy route in one way. Like it seemed to be like the unconscious step to take. Okay, I'll just follow in my dad's footsteps, like a lot of my friends did. I have a lot of friends who I grew up with who were Indian as they sort of moved to Atlanta, and many of them became doctors. And I think for me, it was maybe a point of rebellion. I almost rejected science in high school and really didn't enjoy it. I was a good student, but never really had a passion in high school for studies. Again, it was just never really, I think I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And so, school was just something I had to bring along the way, but it wasn't like, I sat in a math class and was blown away or anything like that.
Interesting. So after high school, you go to Georgia State University. What made you to decide to major in finance?
Well, after I took a year off after Trinity, and Trinity I loved. It was a small school. So after that, I just felt like I outgrew it a little bit. And I wasn't ever going to be a professional baseball player. I think you and I have talked about baseball in the past, and I knew very early on I couldn't hit a curveball. If I couldn't hit a Division III curveball, I had no business doing anything. So if I wasn't going to play baseball, and I just kind of felt a little stifled by the size of the school. So I came back home. I took a year off, and just kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a gap year nowadays. I didn't do anything super productive, but I did sort of try to figure out what I wanted to do. And I got involved in a lot of nonprofit stuff and things like that, and ended up going back to Georgia State and thought, look, a finance degree it's fairly easy. I can get my way through a finance degree, and I can kind of figure out what I want to do after that. It'll give me a couple more years. And then I built in the pre-medical sciences only because I thought, at the end of the day, I know the importance of having a science background. In case I want to do something else, it was nice to have it. And lo and behold, it's really helped down the line. Just being able to look at, medical records, not in a way that necessarily I remember from those days, but just having the drive to be able to sit through and grind through a set of medical records and look up the Latin terminology and remember how things connect to bodies and stuff. And then that sort of interest was born there too. So
interesting. Did you feel any subtle, I don't want to say pressure, but any push at all for going into medicine?
Sure. There was, it was more spoken really than unspoken. It was considered a reputable profession. Again, I think I understand why that existed. A lot of, when I talked to my dad about, what he got to major in high school and in college back in Uganda, he's like, you didn't have majors. You could basically do business, or you could do medicine or science. And if you did business, you could go into accounting, you could go into finance or whatever else. And if you did science, you could then go and further your studies in engineering or medicine. But there weren't like this sort of concept of liberal arts and, an education in the third world is meant to get you out and get you a job. It's not meant to sort of open your eyes to the world in many ways. So I think when they came here, that was sort of their impression of education generally, right? So they were like, get a grounded degree, become an engineer, become a doctor, become something where somebody will employ you. And I never really thought of life that way. And I sort of, as I evolved, I kind of followed some of those footsteps, and then also kind of tried to find my own way. I think as kids do, especially when you're caught generationally and culturally the way that, kids like me were. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a gap between your graduation from Georgia State and your graduation from law school at University of North Carolina. What did you do in that intervening time after you got out of Georgia State?
Yeah, after Georgia State, same thing. I was sort of itchy. I wanted to travel a little bit, so I ended up going into consulting, and I joined a consulting firm that had a very small strategy group. They were largely doing IT work and back-end support, but they had a group that they called the strategic consulting group that would kind of go into a business and help to kind of identify where the breaks were and where the inefficiencies were. And then the technology group would come in behind it and try to help them automate certain processes. So, I was working in the telecom group, so I got to fly to work every Monday and fly home every Thursday night, and, work in places like New Jersey and Seattle, and sometimes Lee Summit, Missouri, and Kansas City, but other times Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. So for 5 years or 6 years, I just got to travel around and work and really work in different companies. So I didn't get bored. I was moving about every 9 months, and it was exciting, but also very unfulfilling. So it was time to move on after that too.
So then, how did the decision to go to law school come about? I mean, you're having this great life, post college. You're traveling around. You're different cities. You're consulting, which is, telling other people how to improve things, what to do. Pretty cool at a young age, but you get bored with that. So what was the thought process there? What was your, that dark night of the soul kind of situation?
Yeah.
There and saying, I got to make a change, and I'm gonna go to law school. How did that happen?
I don't know that it was necessary. That dark night of the soul conversation definitely happened, but it was an evolutionary process. I had been involved in a bunch of nonprofit work that was focused on youth advocacy, youth development, positive youth traits, and things like that. And through that work, I really realized that it was so much more fulfilling, and working with and for people that shared similar values and that really appreciated it. My parents were very, very involved, especially after coming to Atlanta. I still have friends who come up to me now and say, "Oh, you have no idea. We stayed at your house for 2 weeks when you were really young." So my parents' friends will tell me these stories, and what it was is, "Hey, look, I'm Indian. I'm thinking about coming to Atlanta to check it out." And these were the days before internet, but you knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who was brown in Atlanta. And they would call and say, "Listen, this family's coming to Atlanta." My parents were like, "Of course." They kicked my sister and I out of our bedrooms. We were on the living room floor, and a family moves in for 2 weeks, and that would happen regularly. And then, that was just an ethic that they had. They loved Atlanta, and they really knew how difficult it was for them to resettle in a new place. So they would help a lot of families, friends, friends of friends do that. And I would just sort of see the positive impact they had, the impact that I had with the people that I work with. And I decided that, this was sort of a good living, but it wasn't the life I wanted. And so I decided I was going to go back to law school and fight the good fight. I wasn't sure what that was going to be yet, but that was sort of a process where I figured a business degree is not going to help me do the things that I want to do. A law degree, I can do everything I want to do in business, but it'll also allow me to be a better advocate. I realized at a young age, the laws in this country were designed in a very specific way to achieve very specific purposes. And if you want to be an outsider who makes a difference, or who succeeds here, you got to kind of be in the system and help to sort of widen that path for everybody. And so that's part of why I think law school was a natural next step for me.
Wow. So yeah, you can, listening to you describe that and what you said before about growing up and some of the feelings you had, and then you're working the nonprofits trying to help youth. it would seem like a natural progression to get a law degree and be able to change things.
Yeah. So it worked out well. You know, again, when you look back, I never make 5 and 10 year plans because I have never been I've never been in the same zip code that I thought I would be kind of 5 years out. And I'm 48 years old now. And I've had my practice now for going on 8 years. And it's the most kind of grounded, unrestless that I've felt in a long time. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I know you were a trial lawyer and you bounced around a little bit. But it was the same sort of deal for me, which is I finally feel at home. And so I haven't felt that urge to kind of find something else to do.
Man, that's great. So anything interesting that you remember happening in law school?
You know, I was working with the Innocence Project in law school, and I had a great professor who knew that I had sort of this background. And prior to joining law school, I had worked as an investigator for the Public Defender Service in DC for about 6 months. So really gotten my feet wet, and all they handle is felony cases. So, you know, I would work with their investigators. We'd go out and measure crime scene, take witness statements, you know, photographs, things like that. So when I hit law school, it was a very natural way to get involved. And my first year professor in criminal procedure said, look, I've got this really interesting case. Do you want to come work on it with me? And it was a gentleman who we believed had been wrongly convicted of a crime. And I worked on his case for about 3 years, and then even after law school. And that was, I think, what really drew me into all of the inequities in the criminal justice system. You know, it's the things that you kind of hear about and you see from a distance, but until I had gotten to law school and until I started looking into some of these specific cases, I did not realize what a difficult and treacherous system that is to navigate and how it's essentially set up. Like when I would hear about false confessions and people who would confess to things they hadn't done, you know, I was like everybody else, like, that's dumb, there must be something wrong with that person. And then you get more and more involved and you see some of the heavy-handed interrogation tactics that are used, especially with youth and juveniles. You can kind of see that. And that was where I think, again, the next step happened. It became a very easy way for me to see a place to advocate for and to be somebody who can make a difference. So that's how I think got drawn into the public defender world, was through that Innocence Project work.
Wow, man, the Innocence Project, something I've been very interested in. I think it was a book that I had read. It may have been a Grisham novel about the baseball player from Oklahoma, I think, that was wrongly accused and convicted of a murder that he didn't commit. And he spent time, he was on death row awaiting execution. And it was just, you know, almost, I mean, they couldn't make a movie that would have this much drama, but he's literally, you know, not more than hours away when they finally get him a stay, and they're allowed to use DNA evidence to prove that he didn't commit that crime.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's so many wrongly accused. What a great project. I mean, that must have really gotten you fired up.
Yeah, you know, in good and bad. So the issue that we had in this particular gentleman's case was he was convicted as part of a gang of people who committed this murder. So the allegation was that he may not have been at the scene, but he was a co-conspirator, which is, you know, the easiest case to make, right? Conspiracy. And later in life, so he and this other person were convicted of the murder, and he claimed to have no part in it, no knowledge of it. He had an alibi and everything. But he was convicted along with the other person who committed the murder. And, you know, and he was one of these persons. He was half Native American and half African American. And it was in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I don't know if you know that area. They call it Fayetteville. It's down where Fort Bragg is. Very rough part of town. And, you know, he grew up running the streets and was involved in these sort of minor and petty drug offenses. And then this person gets killed, murdered later, and it's basically framed by the police as a drug deal gone wrong. But there was a backstory to it. It was, again, this small town. The detective had grown up in that town, was hitting on and making advances towards, and there was an allegation that he may have sexually assaulted, the detective may have sexually assaulted the girlfriend of one of the co-conspirators. Which is sort of a side story, but the detective focuses in on these two guys right off the bat, says this is a drug deal gone bad. These two are the murderers. And in fact, one of the guys was the murderer, but he says he did it out of revenge. And my guy had nothing to do with it, but he confessed it to his lawyer. And then he hung himself in jail.
Oh, man.
A couple of years later, he hung himself. So now this lawyer has been living with this on his soul and conscience that his client has told him, look, this other guy, and he was involved in the case, so he knew that the evidence against the co-defendant was very weak. So now for 20-something years, he is living with this, with this guilt of knowing this. And then after his client commits suicide, he says, look, now there's no more harm to my client. I have to come forward. And so he came forward and he basically broke the attorney-client privilege. And he was brought up in front of the bar. He was brought up on disciplinary charges. I mean, they tried to take his law license. I mean, they literally, for somebody doing what he believed was morally the right thing, I mean, the prosecutors really went after him. And they did everything in their power. I mean, this was in 1992. So everything in their power, 15, 16 years later, the prosecutors had changed. Everybody moved on, and they did everything in their power to make sure that this man never saw the light of day. Because, again, it was about being wrong and the pride of being wrong. It wasn't about getting the decision right. So even though they had substantial evidence that my guy was innocent, and even the girlfriend who was involved in this, I tracked her down in Fayetteville in 2004, and she said, yeah, Jerry did it alone. He told me why he did it. He was mad at that guy had ripped him off 2 weeks early. He never told anybody. He killed him for that. He's like, that's how he was. He was hot-headed. Lee Wayne had nothing to do with it. And he's like, and I asked him, I was like, well, why didn't Jerry do any of this stuff? And why didn't he tell anybody that Lee Wayne had nothing to do with it? He's like, he didn't care. He's like, he didn't care about Lee Wayne. Who's Lee Wayne to him? So, but it was just shocking that everybody intellectually, I believed, knew and understood that this person was innocent. And it was everybody closing ranks to make sure he didn't even get his day in court. Affidavits that were submitted to the judge had to be sealed, so they couldn't be viewed by the press. I mean, they did not want any sense of public outrage. It was infuriating.
Amazing. What a cover-up.
Yeah.
Well, it's disappointing to hear on the one side, because that's a human life that they're trying to snuff out.
Yeah.
And, but on the other side, it's encouraging to know that, there are lawyers like you out there and the Innocence Project that are working to right these wrongs. Well,
I will tell you there was one benefit to this case. And again, it wasn't for Lee Wayne, unfortunately, but because of all of kind of the backroom fighting and stuff that happened, and we went to the legislature and we were bringing evidence into the legislature, and the attorney who was the one brought in front of the bar, he was so courageous because he knew he was essentially ruining his career, but he went in front of the legislature and testified publicly to all of these facts. And as a result of these things, they finally relented to public pressure, and they formed the Commission on Actual Innocence. And so this is sort of an extrajudicial group appointed by the legislators. And the goal of this group is to investigate claims of actual innocence. So forget procedurally. You're all out of appeals. You're out of your state. You're out of your federal, whatever. You have actually no way to get into court now. But now new evidence has come forward, or DNA, or all these other things, a new witness comes forward. Well, now this commission can actually hear testimony, and they can make a decision about guilt or innocence. So they can't free you, but what they can do is they can reverse the charges and force a retrial. Yeah, that's amazing, because when you think of what really screws people up on the innocence track, it is all of the legal and procedural hurdles. The claims of actual innocence don't actually exist. You can't actually go and say, well, I'm actually innocent. Nobody cares. Well, what's procedurally, how are you here? And show me why you missed that mark in the first place. And it's such a high burden. So that was a good benefit that came out of that. So I'll take that as something, if not everything. So.
Wow. So is it after this that you end up at, the Capitol Defender's Office in New York City and then the Bronx Defenders?
Yeah. During my first year of law school, I knew that this was something that I was going to do. I wanted to do two things. One is I really wanted to become a trial lawyer, and I knew that really early on. And that was part of the draw of law school and the degree is to sort of learn those skills and to be able to apply them. So
Now,
trial law.
How did you know you wanted to be a trial lawyer?
Well, in consulting, I think when I knew I was going back to law school and sort of this evolution, I knew that my effectiveness as a lawyer was not going to be writing briefs and doing contracts. You know, I used to do a lot of pitches and presentations and a lot of sales and sort of looking at things analytically and be able to what I thought I was good at is taking something very complicated and being able to distill it down to simple terms. Whether that's through an analogy or something else, I was able to sort of make people see why they should sort of trust us or go with us on a certain project. So to me, that was a natural transition of a skill set into trial law. Wow. So I knew that was the type of law I wanted to practice. Yeah, I don't have the density in my brain to do appellate work. I'm just not that attuned to details and research and things like that. But I think I can help to sharpen a good argument.
Wow. It's kind of interesting how everything that we do seems to add to, who we become, and it's all good in your background. I mean, that time spent consulting and learning those skills of being able to simplify complex subjects. I mean, that is got to be so valuable when you're trying to try a case.
I mean, and no matter what, especially med mal cases, when you talk about, anatomics and, there's always going to be the defense on the other side who argues, oh, this person is anatomically slightly different than everybody else. So this didn't look exactly the same. Well, when you can boil it down to system failures, this is what you always have to do before step one, and it's like, if you don't know, you can't cut, simple sort of bumper sticker arguments, if you don't know what you're cutting, pull the scissors out, So then the doctor can argue about, oh, they all look different and I wasn't exactly, and it didn't look, well, then what are you doing cutting it, doc? And you sort of try to cut those arguments off at the knees and try to make them very, very simple for a jury who's not invested in your case to understand. And I think that's where the consulting background really, really was formative. What's your elevator pitch? What is your bumper sticker? How do you get somebody's attention? And then now that you have it, how do you sort of apply that insight? It's not just information, right? Because information just dulls people, but how do you sort of apply and show them some insight, show them something they don't know or hadn't considered?
So were these skills that you developed, learned during your 4 years at Bronx Defenders? How many cases did you try there?
Wow. I probably, in 4 years and change, I probably tried about 40 cases, 35 cases. Towards the end, I didn't try as many because there were more serious felonies. They take longer to develop and prep. The stakes are higher. And then I was also supervising a team of 15 lawyers at the time. So my caseload was slightly lower. But what I used to do is I used to sit second chair for all the junior lawyers on my team. So what we would have two attorneys who would try every case, even if it was a 1 hour bench trial. And so, my very first case that I tried, I had been at the Bronx Defenders for 3 days, and I sat second chair on a bench trial that was an assault on a correctional officer. And I did my opening, and it was very cool to be able to do something like that. But we always encourage our younger lawyers to get out there. So I tried a lot of cases, and we had good juries in the Bronx. So I probably tried, upwards of 40 cases. And the last one I tried was an attempted murder case. And it was enough to make me really reconsider criminal law because, again, a case where the guy was innocent. And it was just really, really challenging to get the right people to understand that.
So how did that work out?
So I'll tell you a little bit about the background of the case and why I still remember this case. It was a young man. He was 22 years old, and he was pulled out of a do you know what you will not know, a cuchi frito stand is?
No.
Okay. In the Bronx, so the Bronx has a huge Hispanic population. And so at night they open these after hours joints called cuchi fritos, which literally means fried pork. And so they have these sort of like fried snacks, almost fried anything you want. They serve beer and they're open until like 2 a.m. So he's hanging out in one of these stands or in these little bodegas, hanging out, having a drink with some friends. And the police literally come in and they pull everybody out. They pull them against the wall, hands up, back to the street. And the next thing you know, he's put in a squad car and taken to jail. And until I see him during arraignment, he has no idea what he's even been arrested for. And he's arrested for allegedly, along with 2 other people, almost stomping a person to death a block away. And when the evidence comes out, they say, oh, this was a gang fight and blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking at my client who's wearing, a white Hanes t-shirt, khaki trousers, brown Tim boots, doesn't have a drop of sweat on him, doesn't have a drop of blood on him, no criminal record. And I saw pictures of the person who they had stomped. I mean, this guy had been flattened. I mean, his face was one-dimensional, blood within 3 feet of him. There's no way. I'm like, how did my guy do this and not get a drop of blood on him? Like, his armpit stains were white. So I was like, dude, this is July in the Bronx. This is a fresh t-shirt. Like, this guy puts this t-shirt on to go out that night. It wasn't even a t-shirt left over where it had like sweat stains and, like nothing. So, my investigator and I went out the next day to the Cuchi Frito stand and wherever else. And of course, they didn't have a working camera, but we tracked down the manager and he's like, I remember this guy. Showed a picture. I remember this guy. He's like, I sat down at their table a couple of times. There were some young Dominican dudes. He's like, I remember. He was also, I think he was Puerto Rican. So he's like, I remember we were talking about, wherever he grew up or whatever else. So, I called the prosecutor and I said, look, you got this guy in jail on an attempted murder charge. I'm like, look, his girlfriend was there. She'll testify to his alibi. This manager who's never met him before, but that night will testify to his alibi. And the prosecutor talks to both of them. He's like, yeah, not good enough. So I asked him, like, what do you have on him? He's like, it's an eyewitness ID. And what it was is the person who got stomped, his girlfriend was about a block away when it happened. And so there were 3 or 4 guys. One of them was wearing a white t-shirt, khakis and Timbs, and he had braids. I didn't get a look at his face. Now, I don't know how much time you spent in the Bronx, but that can be a uniform. Like that is, other than a Yankees jacket, that is probably the uniform that young guy's wearing in the Bronx. And so we fought over this, me and the prosecutor, and I to this day I will not remember. He's like, look, I talked to my supervisor, and she said that's what juries are for. So, a jury will never understand the science behind a bad eyewitness ID, right? They never study that. They never understand. Like, in their mind, if I saw somebody do it and I tell you that, you should believe me. So when that girlfriend was going to walk in and point to our guy, that was incredibly scary. And how are we going to build this defense around him and show that, look, folks, no matter how reliable she thinks she is, you cannot buy her ID for all these reasons. But the laws are so bad on what you're allowed to tell the jury about eyewitness IDs. So it was nerve-wracking. But he was found innocent, or not guilty, anyways, and found not guilty. But I'll tell you, the amount of stress and just anxiety and the weight that you feel kind of carrying the water for that, it's tough. It's tough. And it's tough because it's such a broken system. You really feel like, even if you're perfect, you may not get somebody off who's innocent. Even if you're perfect and everything lines up in your favor. I don't think that the general public understands how challenging it is for folks who are in that seat, guilty or innocent. I just think it's very, very, you have the entire resources of the government, and their one job is to try to lock you away. And sometimes not because you're guilty, but because you were in the right place at the right time, and they need a statistic to shut down a case.
Oh, man. That's disappointing. I mean, we're
seeing it, right? We're seeing it now, right? Look at people. People are taking up arms. People are going to the streets over the things that have been happening for, I'm sure, for generations, for decades. But I know that when I was working in the Bronx, we would have what we would call it an immigrant tax. We had immigrant clients who were undocumented. When you think about the zip codes that I represented in the Bronx, they were two of the poorest zip codes in the country. And I think in like a 2 square mile area, like there were like 37 languages spoken. It was so diverse.
Wow.
But because people were poor and many times undocumented, they didn't open bank accounts. When they would get paid, they would carry cash. And we would have I forget what they were called now, the door knockers in the Bronx. They were like, like every police department has their cowboy squad, supposed to be the Rough Riders, and they would go in and I would have guys who got arrested, and I would look at their property sheet. I'm like, okay, and I'd go down, you had a watch, and it's $27. Like $27? They're like, dude, I just got paid. I had like $380. I'm like, the cop only logged in $27. He's like, man, come on. And that would happen regularly.
Wow.
So either all these people just happen to be making up the same lies who don't know each other, or these cops would roll these folks, they would arrest them, they would empty their pockets, and they would trump them up on a stupid charge. And so even if you beat the charge and get your property back, now what are you going to do? And I would tell these guys, I'm like, look, we can go into a civil forfeiture court and we can fight these cops and try to get the money back. No way, man. I got to live in the Bronx. $300, that was tax. I know how I'm not going to be around on a Friday night.
Tax. Wow.
And we called the immigrant tax. And it would happen. You would see it like every other Friday. You would just see a couple of guys come in and be like, dude, I got rolled. And it would be the cops.
So there's multiple areas in what you just said that caught my attention, but one of them is the prosecutors, because I'm really disappointed. The prosecutors know better. They know better.
They should
know better. And their job shouldn't be to get a conviction at all costs just to close a file. It should be to make sure that justice is obtained. And that might mean, hey, we can't bring a case on this guy because obviously it couldn't have been him. I mean, that's really disappointing.
And they weren't all like that. I will tell you, I gave you a bad story. I'll tell you a good story out of the Bronx DA's office. I had another similar case in which, my guy got arrested on the street for allegedly, robbing another guy at Knife Point 2 blocks over. Same thing, shady eyewitness ID. Again, the guy who got robbed, I'm sure meant well, but his description was, again, Yankees jacket, black guy, Yankees jacket, 6 to 6'3". And so they arrested my guy who was in the vicinity, didn't have a dime on him, didn't have a knife on him, and they arrested him for first-degree robbery. And again, we canvassed the entire neighborhood. Everybody knows this guy. He's grown up there. He's 34 years old at the time. He grew up in his neighborhood. He did this. He had really bad anxiety. He would do the same thing every day. He'd go to the corner store. He'd buy a Lucy, Lucy's the loose cigarettes. He'd buy a single cigarette for $0.25. He would go to the park. He would smoke a joint. He would smoke his cigarette. He'd walk back and hang out in his house. That's all he did. And he got arrested on one of these walks. So I literally got like 12 or 15 community members, and I took this district attorney on a walk through we walked through that neighborhood, and I took her to every store, and they all knew him. And she walked into court a week later, and she dropped the robbery charge.
Wow. Over
the objection of the junior prosecutor and over the objection of the guy who said he got robbed and said, I pointed him out. How are you going to do this? She said, I've evaluated the case. I don't think this is the guy, and I can't prosecute it. But I think she was one of the really, really good ones. And she had the kind of fortitude that I think is hard to have in that office. You're almost taught to be an advocate for the victim. Like that's your client. And you forget that you don't. You represent the interests of the community. And I think like everybody else, they're competitive and they want to win, And so it's never about bad people or good people. I think what you incentivize, right? So you have a good conviction rate. Okay. Now you're going to run for office. I'm tough on crime, so there's a lot of problems, and I think we're seeing the result of some of that stuff and some of the civil unrest we're having, but these are problems that have existed for years. The only reason now it's an issue is because now we have cell phone cameras. All of these things happen, and I would watch these things happen on the street, watch African-American young men just get roughed up, thrown into the back of police vans, show up in arraignment with bruises all over them, and they're charged with resisting arrest. And that's the only charge, and they basically just got tuned up and thrown in the back of a squad car. And now a resisting arrest charge justifies the beat up they got. So this happens. The Bronx, they're not, they are not one of the good places to be policed by. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's changed since I've left 15 years ago.
Well, let's hope so. So you decide to leave the Bronx and go back to Atlanta to practice. And you joined a medical malpractice and insurance defense firm. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so, I don't know that I ever thought New York would be home. This was my second time living in New York. I was there as a consultant as well, and I always enjoyed it as a young person. But as I sort of grew up, and then after I graduated law school, I fell in love and married a woman who was living in New York, and so the Bronx Defenders was a really easy choice. And I'm so thankful that they accepted me and that I was able to work there for 4 or 5 years. But New York was never going to be home. So when we were starting a family, being back and closer to our family was really important. My sister lived in Atlanta. My parents still live in Atlanta. And my wife was from the Midwest, but was over the Chicago and Cleveland weather, so was ready for something warmer. So Atlanta was a really easy choice. And I'd always thought I may end up coming back. So it was the natural choice. And then I joined a law firm where one of the partners was a buddy of mine from law school and said, look, come here, you want to do trial work, do some trial work. And so, again, it was a chance to sort of introduce myself to the Georgia legal community, to get my feet wet, to get grounded. And it was really the first time I'd been exposed to plaintiff lawyers, which is crazy, all through law school and stuff. I didn't really have a conscious recollection of saying, hey, I want to do plaintiff's law. It was just something foreign to me, and I'd never met anybody who really did quality plaintiff's work. So I joined the defense bar, and I was doing catastrophic injury defense and really interesting med mal defense. And lo and behold, all the lawyers on the other side of you are really good lawyers. I mean, they're going to make you work. When you show up for a deposition, I'm like, this is not the reputation that I had heard. Oh my God, I thought these guys were hacks and they wrote letters and tried to get checks and got names off the billboards. Like, these guys are good lawyers. And I really, it was eye-opening. Like, and I would be defending these cases, and I would have a lot of empathy for these people, whose lives just sometimes, not always, but sometimes our folks had messed up. And I would have to sit here and find alternative, specious reasons for why this person suffered the injury they suffered, or had this catastrophic brain injury that had nothing to do with the terrible things that our nurses accidentally did, And I just realized that it was not the side of the table that I wanted to be on. So it didn't take me long. It took me about 1.5 years to just say, this isn't for me.
So, so what was that like, coming to that realization? And then how did that work out when you told the firm or the lead partner? What was that day like?
They were incredibly supportive. I think they were nervous for me. I had just had my third son. So my third son at the time was 4 months old. My middle son was 14 months old, and my oldest was 31 months old. So they were like, you're going to quit a job where we're paying you. You're going to hang up a shingle. Okay. And they were like, okay, but they were really supportive. I mean, they were not, they understood. I wasn't somebody at my age and at that stage in life, I needed to be sort of the master of my own domain. I didn't want to be reliant on partners to do, and it wasn't the type of firm where you were going to really go out and develop a book or things like that, because they were, you couldn't do any plaintiff's work. And because of the hospitals and physician practices they defended, there were some conflicts. So I couldn't go out and develop any other clients. So, I think my growth there was just kind of limited. They saw that. So they didn't begrudge me that at all. They were nervous for me, but they were super supportive, and sent me referrals and clients and things like that. So it was not a hard conversation. My wife was the one who had been pushing me to do it.
Yeah. So what was that's probably the more important conversation, actually.
Yeah.
What was the conversation like with your wife?
It was
a big deal to jump out when you got 3 babies at home and you're leaving security.
Yeah.
The unknown.
The funny thing was, it was her who finally got tired of me just talking about it and telling her how unhappy I was. And I was like looking at the work that these plaintiffs lawyers were doing. And sometimes when we had a plaintiffs lawyer who wasn't as good on the other side, I'm like, oh, I would have paid more, like I was just looking at it and she was like, so she's an attorney as well. And she works in-house. So I mean, she's number one, beyond being just an amazing human being and supportive human being, she also had a very good job at the time. So she said, look, our kids are never getting any older. And a lot of the things that I really wanted to do by kind of starting my own practice was not just representing the folks that I wanted to represent, but I wanted to have control of my own schedule. As 3 boys growing up, I wanted to be able to coach them, and I wanted to be able to spend time with them and set my own schedule. And I knew working for somebody else, there would be days where on a Thursday I'd get a call and say, hey, look, I can't cover a deposition in Los Angeles and I have my kid's birthday party. I need you to fly out first thing tomorrow morning. And then you can come back Friday on the red eye. I'm like, I didn't mind doing it because of the position I was in, but it did not seem like a life I wanted. So I would complain to her all the time. Like, I just want to start something. I could be a plaintiff's lawyer. And she finally said, the kids are not getting any older. Stop talking about it. If you're going to do it now. Do it now. And she really did. She got me out the door to go do it. And then I had gone to like some seminar, like my first month or whatever. So it was like a weekend convention. And when I came back, I had been procrastinating about setting up my home office, and I had rented an office and everything else, but I like to work from home. So I went and she set up, like she literally brought 2 people in and set up my entire office the weekend that I was gone. And they just really has been super supportive. So it was not a hard conversation for me. I think, that last step and taking the jump and actually doing it, I think without kind of her push, I might not have done it. So,
man, that's awesome. So what was the very first case you handled from the plaintiff side?
The very first case on the plaintiff side was an old pharmaceutical case. It was a diet drug case that had been kicking around for a while. And her previous attorney had basically sort of fired this client because he didn't think her case was worth any more than X amount of money. And it didn't really seem like it was a good case. So, one of the partners over there kind of said, hey, why don't you talk to Fareesh? Just started a firm. He may have the time to take it on. And I looked at it and immediately something didn't look right. So we went back and looked through the records again and again and again. And the allegation was, or the argument was, how many days of drug use had this woman's husband, how many days did he use this diet drug and then cause this injury? And her previous plaintiff's lawyer had only matched up the prescription for which she had records, but there was no way the damage done could have been from this number of days of use. So as we talked about it more and more, she was convinced that, her husband's doctor had prescribed her more than this, just this 1 week. And so her husband's doctor had been retired and I couldn't find him. He was 77 years old. And through a private investigator, I tracked him down and long retired. And he's still in Atlanta and alive, luckily. And I talked to him and I showed him the picture. He didn't recognize it. I showed him the picture. He said, like, of course. He's like, I remember the wife because they had grown up rooting for like the same obscure like college team or something crazy. Like, I remember this wife. And so I asked about the husband. So of course I remember he came to me for pulmonary hypertension, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, okay. She's like, yeah, he's very obese. He's like, I prescribed this diet drug. And I was like, yes. I'm like, how'd you prescribe it? He said, I only prescribed this drug one way. And so based on the way he prescribed this drug, he signed an affidavit and he said, whenever I prescribed it, he said, this was my standard I always prescribed it this way and blah, 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 blah. I would have done, like, it was an airtight, and we went in and we fought with the special master who was doing the appeals. I hired 2 cardiologists to support the findings and everything else. And essentially her award went up 30-fold. Wow. No, more than that. It went up 30-fold and we appealed it again. And I think at the end of the day, it went up almost 42-fold. Because I was able to even argue that this pocket infection that he developed was sequelae from the diet drug because it required a certain surgery to be done on a pacemaker. So they even went as far as to say, all right, look, if this cardiologist supports this. And so that was how I got involved in bad drugs and sort of medical devices. And that really kind of turned my focus into that area because it was a perfect combination of sort of science and medical background and trial work.
So was that Fen-Phen?
It was Fen-Phen, yeah.
Yeah. And then,
those are forever.
Yeah, it's been around. I was, well, I had a case and attended a hearing and a mediation in the Cleveland County Courthouse in Mississippi with Judge Pickett.
Okay.
And this was the courtroom that spawned the term jackpot justice.
There you go.
And
there you go. I tell people, if you read King of Torts by John Grisham, that stuff. I mean, the first time I went to Vegas in a conference, like that was who it was. These guys who fly in on their own planes and they're talking. It's crazy.
Crazy stuff. Well, so in a case like that, you end up with a certain amount of money from I think it was American Home Products. Was that?
No, I forget who it was a pharmaceutical. It was one of the big ones. I forget who it was, but yeah.
So they then develop an injury grid, and the special master has to determine where your client fits on the grid. And every time they move up on the grid, it generates more of a recovery. So it sounds like you were able to take them from the very bottom to much higher on the grid. And
we were able to go back and show ejection fractures. And I think that's where a lot of sort of folks who get into kind of mass tort or medical device work or whatever, that's where they kind of get tripped up. You almost have to be able to do one of two things. You either have to have the background to be able to go through the medical records and do that and do injury identification, and even ahead of time have your cases lined up to where you know the injury grid is going to come down. Or you have to hire somebody to do it for you. And we do a little bit of both. I probably look at about 85+% of records and make those calls on my own, but there's always sort of tough calls, close calls that I will bounce off of people smarter than me in cases in which there might be sort of causation issues or whatever else. But a lot of younger lawyers that I see, they don't start doing that grid analysis until the end of the case. So the settlement matrix comes out, and then they start to figure out, well, what kind of a case do I have? And then they start to go back and try to get additional medical records, which in some of these mass tort cases last 3, 4, 5 years. On top of that, the medical records were already 4 or 5 years old. You try to go back and get additional medical records. They're all been destroyed. And you really see in the pelvic mesh litigation as an example, we had a lot of women, not my clients. I would hope, and thankfully I believe none of my clients had this happen to them, but we had women who were in categories that should have been rewarded as sort of surgical, extraordinary, what we call extraordinary compensation fund or extraordinary injury fund. They should have been able to dip into that. But because of the way that their attorneys sort of worked up the cases, they never really had an eye towards those issues. So, excuse me, they never really sort of developed the cases fully in that respect.
Wow. Well, it's so important for personal injury claimants and plaintiffs to find true trial lawyers who not only try cases, but who work them up and work them up correctly. Thank God for you guys out there. So, Fareesh, you didn't have to try that case. You worked it up and got a huge and a terrific result for the client. What was the first case you tried on your own when you went out on your own as your own?
The plaintiff's case? Yeah. It was an interesting. It was a car wreck case, but like the other cases that I tend to like to take to trial had some interesting issues to it. In this particular case, it was a car that had been abandoned in the left lane of travel on a freeway at 1 a.m. And the argument was whether or not, number one, it had been abandoned or had just stopped temporarily. And then number two, were warning hazard lights on, things like that. And then number three, was it really stopped in the lane of traffic, or was it halfway over into the shoulder and things like that? And, as I started to focus group the case, I started to sort of hone in on some of the issues that were going to be particularly important. And credibility in this case was huge. So it was going to be a he said, she said case. My client says, I came around the corner and this car is sitting in the middle of the left lane, no lights on, nothing, 2 a.m. The highway's not well lit. Tried to swerve, smack into the car, catastrophe happens. The lead car driver, the defendant, says, No, my car broke down. I was in the left lane of travel. I couldn't get across the right. So I put flashers on, moved halfway over as much as I could, and flashers were on. Your client was driving recklessly, should have seen me. Well, lo and behold, as I'm sort of thinking about how to fight this case, and I'm talking to folks, I started to get 911 calls to request or open records, 911 calls on that 3-mile stretch of highway, north and south, for 15 minutes before and after the wreck. And sure enough, seven or 8 minutes before this wreck, someone calls 911, saying, I almost hit this car. It was in the left lane of traffic, no lights on. You guys got to get somebody out. Are they going to kill somebody? So that credibility was huge. And again, the other lawyer hadn't done that and hadn't gotten that information. They put their defendant up during deposition and had them give this story. And I just locked that story in, and we got to trial. And I brought in the 911 caller who said, yeah, this is the picture of the car, and it was there. And then along with my client's testimony, those folks just got hammered. We got a good verdict. And, what I think about in that case is there was a co-passenger in that case. There was a passenger in my client's car, and I did not represent her because of issues of potential contributory negligence, everything on my driver's side. So I said, look, I can't represent you. I'm taking the harder case, which is the driver. And so she found her own lawyer, and she came back to me a year later because I handled a case for her later. And when she came back to me later, she said, she said, me and Alicia, we talked a lot. And she said, I wish I'd hired or be able to hire you, because her attorney settled her case out of fear of some of this sort of back and forth. And he said, and he said, look, they're tendering their $25,000 to me. I'm just going to take it. Because they didn't have any issues of contributory negligence on his side, they weren't tendering the full. They were offering him some money short of the policy, and he took it. And we went forward. We busted the policy, and we got some money on bad faith, which I think that he probably would, or they probably would have been able to do as well. But those types of things happen. But I think that's the importance of, again, trying cases. There was certainly not going to be a slam dunk in this case when we rejected the settlement offer and went forward. But I was willing to put my client on a credibility argument because we had focus grouped her, and the jury liked her and believed her. And that was the feedback that we got from the actual jury. They liked her, and they didn't like the defendant, which is also the feedback that I got from our focus groups. So, those types of things really helped.
Yeah. So Fareesh, what gave you the idea? What gave you the inspiration to go check the 911 records?
My criminal justice days from being a public defender. It's the first thing we do, is because you don't get full discovery. So we're always calling 911, checking who called 911, from where, what was their description. We want to go see their vantage point. Literally, if they call 911, I'm going to go stand in that corner and see what they could see. So I had an investigator, and I would go out on all of my cases that were going to be sort of felony cases or serious issues. I would walk the street with my investigator just to get a feel for it. I almost say you don't know what you don't know until you know it, So I don't know, but now out of habit, as I'm thinking, I'm like, how else can I prove how long this car been for? It's just a shot in the dark. I've done 100 of these things for other cases, and it just turns up empty. But this is why I do it in all these cases, because the one time it hits, number one, it's a great story, but number two, it's a great result, right? Like, you get to go back and tangibly show your clients that, look, when you go above and beyond, which I try to do for them, like it does have results, and the choice in lawyer makes a difference.
Man, that's tremendous. So what's, have you had any defeats?
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that at the beginning of your introduction about the importance of losses. I'll sort of give you my 2 cents about it. We had a lawyer on the defense side. I won't name her, but she worked at a large medical malpractice firm, and there would be articles written about her, and she was famous for being 100-0 or, 100 wins in a row on the defense side. And she was the darling of the defense bar. What people didn't know is she was settling cases left and right. She was settling. The difference is the defendants always get to decide what case to settle because they decide how much money to put on it, right?
Sure.
So she would decide, hey, this case I'm going to lose, I'm going to settle. And the dynamic that we're in as plaintiffs lawyers are, oftentimes on the good cases, they offer you enough money to not make the risk of a trial plus the length of time really worth it for you. But other times they don't, and you roll the dice. You tell your client, look, have the trust in yourself and in me. Let's reject this and let's move forward. But when she had that 100-0 track record, all the plaintiff lawyers used to laugh because we didn't care. We settled cases with her all the time. And we have plaintiff lawyers who brag about the same thing. You are too conservative if you have a perfect track record on either side of the bench. That's my opinion. You don't scare anybody. And at the same time, I think if you try cases and lose, and in the case that I'm about to tell you about, I had this experience. The lawyer at the end of this case said, look, Fareesh, the next time, if we're within, I don't care, just whatever number that you think you're not getting from one of my counterparts, call me, I'll see what I can do.
Wow.
So, and she was in-house for a major insurance company with whom we sell cases with all the time. And I think that when I used to do these defense reports for our adjusters on the defense side, we had a paragraph on our plaintiff's attorneys. Does he try cases? Does he win? Does he work up his cases? Is he lazy? Can you sneak stuff by him? Is he going to find out these bad facts? So, again, from my days on the defense bar, I knew what the defense adjusters are looking for in these reports and how they're evaluating me. And so I try to make sure from step one, they know that I'm here to work this case and to make sure that we get a good result, whether it's through trial or settlement. And I think at the end of the day, if you work your cases up for trial, you definitely, as you said, get better settlement values.
Oh, yeah.
Because every step of the way, they see that you are there and ready and prepared. There will be a lot of plaintiffs lawyers. I think the impression that defense attorneys have is that we stand there with our hat in hand, asking for something. And the impression I give the defense attorneys right off the bat is I said, look, we're not here for anything that we're not entitled to. These are compensatory damages. You took something, and now we're asking for you to pay to make it right. And we're not here hat in hand. We can disagree over the value. That's what a jury is about, right? But understand that that's what I see my role as, not here to take what you're willing to give. And so I think that attitude has also really sort of cemented. A lot of us do similar work, and there's a lot of really good trial lawyers in Georgia, and we know who one another are, and defense attorneys who know who we are. And it's funny, I get referrals from defense attorneys. So as long as it's not their client, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, what you said about working the case up for trial from the beginning and showing up and the other side knows that you are teeing that case up for trial. And if you don't get a just settlement, a number that causes you and your client to say, yeah, let's not risk this
right
with a trial, that you will try the case, win or lose. And
I think you have to be able to do it. Yeah. You have to be willing to sing for your supper. And there have been more than one night where I come home hungry, and that is the life I chose up for. I always remember that it's really my client who suffered the loss in this case, right? I lost some time and other stuff, but it's my client who I had that tough conversation with. But knock on wood, in the loss that I've had, my clients are very understanding because I think, number one, they know I gave it 110%. Number two, they knew up front what the challenges were in the case, right? And why are we trying the cases? And usually we try a case in which you're going to get, 100 or a 0, right? We typically don't fight over like $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000. And you know how this works on the plaintiff side.
Right.
We can usually figure that out. The times that we argue, as they say, we're not responsible for the shoulder surgery at all. Or we did not even cause this wreck, so we're not liable for the wreck, therefore not liable for any injury. So when we're that far apart, those are cases where you just show up and you let the jury tell you who's who.
Decide.
Yeah.
So you, one thing I wanted to talk to you about is you come back to Atlanta and you're working in a preeminent medical malpractice defense firm, and you got a dad and a mom, I think, that were both in medicine. Your mom, I think you said nursing.
Yeah.
And dad, a doctor. So when you switch sides, did that make things uncomfortable at all around the dinner table, the family dinner tables?
It did, but not for the reason that you think. It's funny. On the defense side, I would talk about my cases with my dad a lot. So he sort of understood my mentality, and he would really, having a father who is a doctor who can really help you cut to the chase of certain things is incredibly helpful sometimes. And my dad and I would talk a couple times a week anyway. So every once in a while, like, hey, I'm struggling with this issue. Like, what do you think? Should the nurse have done something different? Am I really thinking it? So he was always kind of involved, and he is involved to this day in my cases. We have conversations about him. He is very risk averse. So the switch to him was more the insecurity, the instability, that is the phone ever going to ring? Who's going to call you? Nobody knows you. So that was, I don't even think he had time to process sort of the mental, sort of emotional part of it. As we talked later, and as the practice is picked up, we have conversations all the time. And he knows, I've in 8 years, I have sued one doctor, and that doctor really had it coming. But I tend to be fairly conservative on these cases. Number one, because in Georgia, we lose 80% of our med mal cases that go to trial because it's just a very tough venue. The laws are tough. And then we have juries who, especially Southern juries, who cannot fathom or won't allow themselves to believe that their doctor made a mistake, because obviously if it happened to this person, my client, it could happen to me as a juror, and I can't even accept that. So I'm always cautious about those cases anyways. But he always understood my philosophy, which is, I do think at the end of the day, if you do things that harm a client, and it is a bad practice of medicine, not just a bad outcome, he's on board with the idea that people should be held responsible. So he didn't have a problem with that,
Wow. Well, that's great. That's great. So you mentioned that you were going to hit on the one case that that you were going to.
You want one of the losses?
Yeah.
You want losses or wins? I'll give you a loss. So the case in which the one that I lost, in which that defense attorney came back to me later and said, look, if we're ever close on a number, or you're close with any of the attorneys in my office, call me and I'll see what I can do to move. That was actually after a case I lost. And it was a case in which, if you haven't heard the term trial psychosis, it's a term that trialers use where you get so invested in a case and in your client that you stop seeing all the warts of a case and you only see one side of it. So focus groups are great at pulling you out of that. So I had not been focus grouping these cases at the time, or this particular case I hadn't focus grouped because of the way that it came into my office. So we go into trial, and at the end of the day, we lose the case because the combination of the fact that the driver who rear-ended my client, she was pregnant at the time and didn't get injured, and then there was not a lot of damage to my client's car, despite all the other sort of medical evidence of tying together the injuries. It was just somewhere a jury could not sort of suspend disbelief long enough to kind of go there, no matter what the other evidence showed. And when I kind of bounced it off of my trial attorney friends, they're like, oh yeah, you weren't going to win that one. It was a tough one. You were going to win that one, So it was good in the sense that I learned two things from that. Number one, I learned to no matter what, even though I could delay trial, focus group my cases, because I think those things would have come out earlier. And number two, I also learned that when you lose a case and you share that with your colleagues, they will share so many more stories of losses that you didn't know they had encountered or succumbed to. And it becomes like one of those, tears in our beers, and we drink together for a night, and then we move on. And the next day it's back to the fight. So.
Wow. So, what would be the case that so far has been the pinnacle in your career at this point?
I'll pick a recent case for you. So in the criminal, when I was doing criminal defense, I feel like there was a lot of some similar cases that I shared with you where, from a human standpoint, I still remember these clients, 10 and 12 years later, but I'll give you a plaintiff's case because I think it sort of reflects kind of how I started to practice law a little bit differently in the age of COVID, where we cannot get into a courtroom now for maybe 2 years to try a case because the courtrooms have been shut down for 14 months. We have had to be more and more as plaintiff lawyers creative about how do we effectively advocate for our clients. So I used to have a rule where I would never agree to a mediation until we had a trial date on the calendar. And I would do that because I wanted to be real for the defendants. a lot of our defense folks, they're like, okay, this is, we'll test the mediation, then we'll keep offering more money. My attitude is just a one shot and then you're done, and then we try the case. So my last case, which was sort of a bigger case, I took the attitude that I was going to try it during mediation. So I literally had 3-minute video clips of who my direct witnesses were going to be. I had videos of my doctors. I had, a video prepared for my client. I had crosses of their defendant on video on deposition. And I did a mini opening. I did the witnesses, and I did a mini closing. And I literally took, normally my openings and closings and my presentations about 20, 25 minutes total, maybe, on a case that might be a 7-figure case. On this one, I think I took about 45 minutes. And I really did a full mini trial. And I thought it was effective for a couple of reasons. Number one, they got to see all of my visuals, right? Like, I'll show you one that I literally was just breaking up, but this is, all of these sort of visuals that now, I don't need anymore, but I have all my trial boards ready. And I would pull them out during mediation, and they would know. They were like, oh my God, this guy's not ready for me. He's ready for trial. Like, he literally is ready for trial tomorrow. And so because we couldn't backstop these mediations with trial dates, a lot of us are sort of bouncing ideas off of each other. And this is one of the ones that I've kind of been advocating people to do, and I think is really effective because they get to see you in action, right? So number one, attorneys who don't know you very well, they get to see you on your feet. They get to see how well you are advocating. They get to kind of see your draw in front of a jury. They get to see your client in a prepared environment. And then they also get to see, again, level of preparation. That I've spent, $10,000 to get ready for this mediation. You think I'm going to be cheap at trial? Come on. So that resulted in a case where we had been fighting. They had been stuck on $800,000 for a long time. And I said, we kept rejecting it. And then we finally said, all right, well, let's go to mediation. They want to go to mediation. And I said I would do it under certain conditions. And we did it. And I did this full presentation. And we kind of fought. But, 5 hours later, walked out of there with 1.3. So it was a very good result. And it was, it was maybe close to trial value for that case. In my mind, I try to sort of think about, what might trial value be? How many times might I get that? What might my middle number, my low number? And then you try to figure out with your client, what is a reasonable expectation at settlement time, right? They're going to get a discount for settling. What should that discount be? And that's really the only time we have a conversation about that is, look, this is what verdict value is. You're entitled to a discount for settling it at this amount of time and taking the risk off the board, but this is how I think of it. And I think we had a good mediator in that case, but really it was, I think the other side just really kind of got a glimpse of what their future looked like in a courtroom, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now. And the doctor did a very good job of effectively talking to them about potential for future re-injury or future aggravation or future medical care. And so, I went in there with a very clear strategy of hitting them on the liability as well as the potential for future exposure to them. And I think it was effective.
Man, it sounds like it was. So in spite of not having a trial date, and in fact, trial could have been a year or two or more pushed out into the future, this presentation with your opening and your evidence convinced them to go ahead and settle the case right then and not wait. I mean,
yeah, well, they've been arguing over Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry. They've been arguing over liability for half the time, which is why they only wanted to pay $800,000. Oh, it was an injury on a bus, and the argument was whether or not the bus sort of lurched forward before my client had a chance to grab the handrail, and so she spun around and fell. Or did she go to take a step and just slip? And that was their argument. But again, this is where, if you'll allow me, I want to brag for a moment. We had no independent eyewitnesses. And of course, the cameras on the bus were not working. But my client remembered that the man who helped her up, he sat her down in the chair and she thanked him and whatever else. And he told her, you need to get checked out. You got hit really hard. And he said to her, no, ma'am, I'm a veteran. We don't leave anybody behind.
Oh.
And so she said, I remember that. And so as we got the logs for the bus, I found he had a special bus pass because he was a military veteran. So I was able to find him because we found his name because he swiped his card. And I went and I tracked him down, and I had a 3-minute video from him saying, no, she didn't even get to take a step. That bus driver took off and pow. He's like, it was like a shotgun. He's like, everybody in the bus were like, oh my God. So, you know, the deposition of the driver who was like, oh, I didn't even see, and she kind of slipped, and I didn't even know it until I looked down. He was like, man, that driver saw the whole thing. He had his head turned. He didn't even ask if she was okay. All of a sudden, you start to see like the adjuster's eyes, like, you know, it's like, how come we didn't know about this guy? You know, how come nobody found him? And all of a sudden the numbers immediately started to creep up. So again, when you think about sort of just trying to figure out every angle of the case, I still go back to my public defender days where, you know, I didn't have a paralegal and a huge staff. I really had to kind of sink my teeth into my own cases. And that has really carried over now, which I think has been helpful.
Yeah, no kidding. You can really see how that's helped you out. So the part that I wanted the point I wanted to make was that I think that because of COVID and courtrooms having been shut down for some time, that some members of the plaintiff's bar have felt like it was it's a disadvantage in trying to get cases settled because you don't have that normal that hammer hanging out there of a court date, which you used to like to have already, you know, posted on the calendar before you'd mediate. And I thought that was interesting that without that, still, because of the presentation, they decided, hey, we're not going to wait. I mean, this can only get worse. In other words, in their mind, we're going to pay now. Whereas I think that there's sort of an idea out there that some defendants and insurance companies, because they live on the float, that's how they make their money, is hanging on to money before they pay it back to us in the form of claims, right? That they're just not going to settle at all because they don't have any pressure to do so. But
it's absolutely, so it is absolutely true. And you know, it's funny. I've been fortunate. I've settled 2 7-figure cases this quarter, first quarter of 2021, with similar dynamics in the sense that neither of them had trial date backstops, but I think the presentations and the witnesses, especially the before and after witnesses, are super effective in the same way that they're going to get to see a trial. And what I think it does is it certainly ramps up the pressure from a bad faith perspective, because at some point they are no longer going to be able to say, we didn't know it was this bad for us. You know, even if their own people are lying to them, even if their defense attorneys are maybe giving them a glossier version of the insurance defense reports that I might give, you know, from my perspective of the case. Yeah. You know, they're starting to realize when you do your presentation, you have the before and after witnesses. Okay, now I'm getting my first honest glimpse of what this case looks like, you know, and I think they're being judicious about which cases they settle. And some of their bigger liability cases, I think they're trying to be smart and get off the books. If they know they're going to get popped down the line, some of the insurance companies have actually been more aggressive as the courts are opening about clearing some of these cases. So I think there's an opportunity now to really be aggressive and get some work done.
Yes, I agree. And we've seen the same thing.
That's right. You see all of it.
Idea that it was going to be hard and that it wasn't going to be worth it. There wasn't going to be any pressure, but it's turning out that there are a different set of motivators on that side of the table. And as one trial lawyer said to me, hey, adjusters still have to adjust cases and close them. And defense counsel still has to defend and bill, or they're not going to be able to pay the light bill, the rent bill. So they're going to find ways to make things happen too. Otherwise, you know, nobody can survive. So,
and it's job security a little bit too, because the adjusters, when they settle cases, enough people sign off above them that everybody gets a cover your butt kind of signature on top of them. Hey, I'm paying this. Okay. Hey, I'll authorize it. Can you? So we always joke, nobody loses their job on a settlement, but you know, I had a case in which a woman had a $25,000 policy. We had a case that clearly exceeded it. The adjuster wanted to offer us 15. 3 months later, we got 95,000, and that adjuster was, you could just see just the pain on her face. She was the one who had to sign that check, and now she's gonna have to go back to somebody to explain, you know, how she paid 70,000 over policy when she could have gone out for 25. And I thought we presented a fair case for why it was worth 25 or more than 25. So I think you never can forget that at the end of the day, these are human beings on the other side of the table. And like you said, they have their own motivations. And if you can start to identify what those motivations are, and self-preservation is a huge one, you can almost frame your presentation, which I always do. I always bring bad faith into my presentation because it's a direct reflection of how that adjuster analyzed and adjusted the case. So she knows that's going to go on her side of the ledger, that I really blew this one. And if we get popped for bad faith, even if it's a 25% chance, you don't want to go answer to your bosses about how that happened to you, you know? So I think self-preservation is a huge motivator.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. And we should probably explain for the lay audience, potential plaintiffs out there, injury victims that are looking for attorneys, this concept of bad faith. Bad faith shows up in settlements with insurance companies when the insurance company puts their interest ahead of their insured. And the way that happens is, as Fareesh just explained, the insurance company has got a policy limit on the claim of, say, $25,000, and they're given an opportunity to pay the $25,000, and they don't. They're putting their interest ahead of their client by saying, you know, we think we can settle this for cheaper and save more money. And when they do that, it creates a situation that is referred to as opening up the policy, I think is the way it's phrased, which means that if the insurance company had a chance to settle for the policy limit or slightly less and didn't do it, then any excess verdict is going to be paid by them and not their client. Doesn't come out of the client, doesn't come out of the insured's pocket, right?
That's right. That's correct. So now, I don't know how they do it in other states. In Georgia, your explanation was exactly right, right? So in this case in which, you know, say Janice paid for $25,000 worth of coverage. She hit my client and we say, Janice, we'll take your $25,000. And the insurance company says, no, we're only going to give you 15. We think we can save 10, even though Janice paid for it. Well, so what we actually have to do is we have to go now get a verdict against Janice. So how it would work in the real world, I'll go get a verdict for $95,000 against Janice. And then she would have to assign her bad faith claim that she would have against her insurer. She would have to assign it to my claimant, and then we would now go back and have a case against the insurance company on her behalf. So it's not the easiest thing to collect. A lot of lawyers don't really push bad faith because, you know, by the time that you have to go through the procedural hurdles, most of them feel like, we're never going to get it anyways. But, you know, again, it's something for me. It's a chance to sweeten the pot. And even if I never think I'm going to get bad faith penalties, it is, like we talked about, a huge self-preservation motivator for an adjuster. You do not want bad faith on your side of the ledger one day as an adjuster, unless it's because you said we should settle and your superior said no. Yeah. Then you can live with a bad faith. Otherwise, that's a lot of explaining to do. You know how, and then 25 to 95 is a big stretch. You know, you know stories where there was a $25,000 policy and people have paid out millions. You've heard the stories, I'm sure. So. These insurance companies who take their chances, I feel like I owe it to my clients to put their feet to the fire. If they're going to use these tactics to stall and delay, I'm going to use whatever levers at my disposal and really try to amp up pressure, especially in the day where, like you said, we don't have a backstop of a trial date. They know our clients really need the money now because of COVID. So they can, when they were dangling $800,000 in front of my client was disabled, living in her sister's home. She was 58 years old, living in my sister's home, sleeping on the sofa after having back surgery, and was literally a burden on her family. And they knew that because of her deposition, and they were trying to dangle money to her to sort of, you know, create the wedge between me and her. So she would say, I want that money, I need that money. But, you know, again, you have a good client who has faith in you. You're upfront with them all along about what a number means. It means justice. It means dignity, right? It means other things other than just the dollar. And I said, you know, give me a chance and let me do for you what I think I can. So, self-preservation has been a huge lever for me to be able to use against these adjusters because they use theirs, right? They know our clients need money. They dangle it. Yeah. Both sides
are working each other, but the threat of bad faith and guys, trial lawyers like you that are are thinking about it and thinking about how to use that as a lever by backing the defendant or their insurance company, really, we should say, the casualty company, into that sort of, I refer to it as a box canyon that they can't get out of. And I've seen several of those cases, and I was thinking of one when you were describing your case, where we had $100,000 policy, and it ended up in a $6 million settlement, 60 times bigger, because the insurance company, and I think it was State Farm in that case, didn't want to pay the full policy, and they got opened up, and before it was over, they volunteered to pay $6 million. It wasn't even a verdict. They volunteered. They wanted to get away.
Right. And that's, and I'm glad you raised that, because there really is sort of this incremental sort of step. So in this particular case with the 25 that I'm thinking of that just got settled last week, we would have taken the 25. They didn't tender it, of course. And then as soon as I filed a lawsuit, the defense attorney calls, hey, we're going to tender the 25. And I say, well, look, because of these numbers, we'll take X right now. I can't take 25, but I'll take X. Oh, they're never going to pay it on a 25 policy. But okay, no problem. Hey, they're ready to pay X. I'm like, listen, now she's got more treatment. Now the number is Y. They're never going to pay Y. They're anchored to X now. And it's almost like some people want to keep chasing the market, until they finally just get ahead of it. They run and they said, okay, look, take it. We just want out. Just take it. We want out. But it's not like, I don't try to play gotcha. I don't say it's 25 today and 95 tomorrow, bing, ding. I try to line it up to the case, because if you're going to get bad faith, it has to legitimately be an issue of reasonableness. So I try to be reasonable, but I also try to be fair to my clients at the end of the day. I know the insurance company's not here for them, right? So we're going to get every dollar they're entitled to. And I'm sorry that someone on the other side is going to get dinged for it, but it happens.
Yeah, it does. But I think, everybody, just about everybody has certain feelings about insurance companies. I mean, the old adage is they've got a smile on their face when we bring them our check to pay our premium, but they're not quite so happy to see us when we have a claim. And the other adage I've heard is that the milk of human kindness does not flow through the veins and arteries of an insurance company.
Yeah, that's true. The adjusters are sometimes really nice, amazing people. I think some of them, by virtue of getting beat up every day, by plaintiffs' lawyers, by their bosses, don't necessarily always come across that way. But, I always try to get to know these folks on a personal level. I'll talk to them, as they're looking up a case. I'm like, oh, how are things? How's the family? And I think the more that you're a human, I think you can disagree without being disagreeable. I don't get into shouting matches with my adjusters. I don't get into name calling. I don't tell them they're dumb. I said, look, this is how I see the case. If you don't, I understand it, right? It is what it is. I tell my clients all the time, my job is to prove it to them, right? That's why you hired me, is to prove it. Sometimes you can prove it in a week. Sometimes it's a month. Sometimes it takes a jury to be your proxy and prove it to them. But yeah, I think the human element is sometimes lost. And there's like little things where I think if you treat them as human beings, you recognize that what drives and motivates them drives and motivates the rest of us, They're not so different from us. But yes, the company themselves, they're not here to pay you a dime, right? Yeah. Start with that understanding and go from there. Yeah. Yeah.
The institution doesn't have the milk of human kindness, but you do run into adjusters and that definitely do have understand the plight of injury victims. And I think you get, from my standpoint, seeing lawyers who take the attitude that you do, Fareesh, and that is to treat the adjuster with professionalism and respect, be collegial, advocate for your client's position to the utmost of your ability, but don't do it in a way that tears down that other individual. And you get a lot further, not only in the
absolutely,
case, but it comes back to you.
You're going to see each other again. You might beat them this time, and you might feel really good about making that person super humble in front of you, but the next time, so I'm always mindful of that too, right? The elevator goes up and down. That's I have good cases, I have bad cases, but.
Well, great podcast with you. Great to hear your stories. We haven't talked about your boys. How old are your boys now?
My youngest is 8, my middle is 9, my oldest turned 11 2 months ago. But I got to live the dream. I do coach them. I get to spend a lot of time with them. I get to see them grow into these cool little young men. So It's been fun. Yeah, they got their own personalities, very, very different from each other. But
so now I got to ask you, you say you're coaching them. You're not, are you a little league dad like we talked about earlier?
I am not. I only coach in the church leagues.
Oh, okay.
Because of the little league parents.
Yeah.
I am not that way with my kids. I want them to they don't have to be superstar athletes. I want them to enjoy playing the game. And if they're drawn to something, that's fine. But I've talked to so many really good coaches. They're like, look, if your kid has a particular talent for a sport, they will show you. They will identify it. Just give them the opportunity. And then you can kind of push them into more coaching or whatever else. So I coach year-round little league. I coach soccer, baseball, basketball, and I've done flag football. So whatever season is going on and whatever they're playing, I can usually coach 2 out of my 3 boys. The third is tough, but I'll coach 2 out of the 3, and then we rotate. So
great. That is
awesome.
Great. Well, I've got 3 questions for you to wrap this up.
All right.
It's been a great podcast, and man, I really, once again, I love hearing some of the stories you've told about, about your time with the Bronx defenders and the Innocence Project case. Really, really interesting. And then coming out on the defense side, it's so fascinating to hear a story like yours, where all of that stuff behind you, including your consulting work after college, has all led you not only to where you are today, which is, it sounds like a really good place, but has also helped you in your practice, in your trial skills, in representing plaintiffs, and being a top trial lawyer. We understand that's how attorneys get good settlements. You don't get good settlements unless you are a true trial lawyer that tries cases and like you, starts teeing them up for trial very early, so the other side can see that you're a serious trial lawyer and that this isn't just some sort of a sideline or a hobby.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, 3 last questions I want to ask you. What are you most appreciative of in your life right now, today, minute?
So outside of the things that are most important to me, which are my friends and family, and I have an amazing support group upon whom I rely. I've got a couple of good guy friends. I call them my board of directors. The 4 of us will talk through all, and they're all, we've known each other for 25 years from our New York days. We talk through all of our big life decisions together. And they really keep me grounded. So I'm thankful for that, first and foremost. But
are they trial lawyers too?
None of them are trial lawyers.
Wow.
One is a doctor. One is at a startup. He's a CFO to startup. And one is a typical kind of corporate bank, also kind of very high up now. So all sort of different fields, but very incredibly smart, really high EQ, can read situations very well, can sometimes hear the unspoken. Even with me, I will say things and they will hear what I'm really sort of struggling with. So invaluable group of, and my wife is part of that as well, but invaluable group of support structures. So.
Wow, that's tremendous. So, Fareesh, what is the one principle or cause that you feel strongly enough about that when jeopardized, you would literally stand up, draw a line in the sand and fight?
It's happening now with a lot of these election stealing bills that you see. When I moved back to Georgia, it was a red state, and through a lot of hard work, I'm not going to take any credit for this, but a lot of organizations that I will support and be part of, Georgia's now turned purple and a very slight shade of blue. But you still see kind of this power group who literally, it's like if you want to share power with us, you have to collect it out of our cold, dead hands. And so this fight to make sure that the right to vote and the right to participate in our democracy, especially given my parents' experience and why they were so excited to be and happy to be in America and so thankful to be in America. I've always looked at this country and in Georgia as being incredible and amazing, but imperfect. And I think we all have a responsibility to work and make it better. And this is one of the areas I've really devoted a lot of time and effort and hope to continue to do so. So the right to vote and access to the right to vote is a huge deal right now for me.
Very cool. So final question, if your career, Fareesh Sarangi, was to be condensed into one sentence when it's all over, what would that one sentence say about you? Or what would you want that sentence to say about you?
I think I would want it to say, I never gave up. You know, no matter how tough the fight was, no matter how bleak the journey, you know, I think one of the things that certainly my background in the Bronx and seeing my parents' story is, you know, it's not meant to be easy, right? The gift is always or often in the struggle. And some of the best lessons I've learned have been, like you said, through trial losses, through difficult situations with clients, through, you know, difficult situations in life. So for me, you know, this idea that I hope I never give up. I hope I always fight for the things that I believe in. I'm 75 years old. I want to be out on the front lines doing this. So,
well, thanks for taking the time, and thank you for being a tough fighter for the rights of injury victims. The entire time while we're recording the podcast, I keep glancing up at the picture over your shoulder. Looks like Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali standing over the top of Sonny Liston, I believe.
Yeah, I think that was the Maine fight from Maine, I believe. Yeah. So,
an incredible picture.
And he was that guy, right? You think about how much Muhammad Ali sacrificed for his ideals, his principles. You know, I always like to think I have that kind of strength, but again, you never know, right, until you're tested. But certainly a role model in that respect.
Yeah, he was a great fighter, and having grown up in the '60s, I remember when Cassius Clay at the time refused to go to Vietnam to be inducted, and there was a general feeling that, you know, that wasn't right, and he was willing to go to jail for that, and he did go to jail. And, you know, all these years later, as we look backwards and we get to look back at history and we read the books about what really happened with Vietnam, you know, the feeling I always have had is there was one guy who called it right. I mean, there were others. There were lots of senators that tried to stop that unholy war over there. But amongst the rest of us, there was one famous guy who really called it right, and then he felt so strongly about it that he went to jail, and that was Muhammad Ali. And now, you know, I think the lens of history has really changed in its interpretation of what he did back then.
Yeah. So, I tell my kids we're living 50 years behind at a time. You know, so they're reading about everybody apologizing for what happened 50 years ago. And yet we're making so many similar mistakes now. And 50 years from now, somebody's grandson will apologize to someone else's grandson, and we'll keep moving, right? But that's what you hope, is that you see enough of what has happened, that you have a moral compass, and that you're strong enough to stand behind that moral compass, no matter who else tells you that the things that you advocate for or you believe in are wrong. And I think some of that experience kind of growing up, maybe outside of the mainstream norm, right? Being a brown kid growing up in what I considered South Georgia at the time, you know, sort of fighting my way through kind of every experience, to sort of, it cemented that in me, that, you know, that's part of what life is about, is not just creating opportunities and experiences, but doing so for others and making sure you widen that path for others to follow behind. So yeah. I hope I continue to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I know you will. Well, Fareesh Sarangi, you are a settlement pro, and congrats on making it through the podcast. And
I appreciate it, Jack.
We will publish links to your website and your phone number so that prospective plaintiffs who are looking for an attorney in the Atlanta area that handles medical malpractice and defective medical products, tractor trailer accidents, and other types of personal injury claims will be able to find you. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you guys are doing for our clients too, Jack. It's, I think, you know, when I talk about support structures and teams, I always appreciate the people who are here to support us as plaintiffs lawyers to make our job easier and in some cases doable. So thank you for that as well.
You're welcome. Well, everybody, this has been the Settlement Pros podcast brought to you by the SPI group of companies. 3 companies, 3 goals for trial lawyers who want to learn how to increase the size of their settlements and verdicts while shortening the time it takes to actually get paid, and then help their clients plan and protect their settlements to last a lifetime. And also, one of our other sponsors is the Trial Lawyer Protection Packet. The Trial Lawyer Protection Packet allows trial lawyers to limit their scope of liability by obtaining their clients' informed consent regarding 3 important areas in settlements. That's tax, finance, and government benefits. And the Trial Lawyer Protection Packet allows attorneys to save time and money for themselves and their staff. So this has been Jack Meligan for the Settlement Pros podcast. Thank you again to our guest today, Fareesh Sarangi, and we'll see you again on the next podcast. So long, everybody. I'm your host, Jack Meligan, here to share my almost 40 years experience as a settlement planner, pre-mediation consultant, and financial advisor. I've had the privilege of working with more than 1,400 personal injury victims and their families across 44 states, and I've personally attended over 500 mediations. Throughout my career, I've encountered the full spectrum of trial lawyers, the good, the bad, and occasionally the ugly. The essence of this podcast is to guide personal injury victims towards finding true settlement pros, trial lawyers who are not just talkers, but doers, those who step into the courtroom arena ready to fight for justice. These are the attorneys who win or lose, carry the respect of their adversaries because they prove time and again that they are willing to go the distance for their clients, regardless of the outcome. That makes them dangerous to the defendants. Our mission is to spotlight these exceptional trial lawyers and settlement experts from across the country, revealing their true stories, strategies, and the passion that drives them. This platform is about weeding out the pretenders and connecting you with the contenders, the best in the business. Remember, the most compelling trait of a trial lawyer settlement pro is their readiness to embrace the courtroom's challenge, believing in the power of their client's story regardless of the outcome. So whether you're a personal injury victim seeking justice, an attorney looking for co-counsel, or simply interested in the art of trial law, this podcast aims to arm you with the knowledge to distinguish the true pros from the cons.